No one eats alpacas. I don't know why you bought them in the first place.
Because they're the animal of the future, remember?
Greetings, children of the screen, your friendly neighborhood nerd scum here once again, and you know what? I finally got to check out Color Out of Space, and you know what? I really enjoyed it. Some people are hailing it as a modern-day masterpiece, which might be a little bit of a stretch. Other people are saying that it is Lovecraft done right, and you know what? We all know how YouTube works. You've all seen the title of the video. Fuck this. Let's just dive into this already. Color Out of Space, released in 2019, unrated, coming in at 111 minutes. Directed by Richard Stanley, written by Scarlett Armis, and Richard Stanley, based on a story by HP Lovecraft. With a cast that includes Nicolas Cage, Jolie Richardson, Madeline Arthur, Elliot Knight, Tommy Chong, Brendan Meyer, and Julian Hillard. The film received awards at the HP Lovecraft Film Festival for the Best Feature and for the Audience Choice. Right on, guys. So as I said, I really enjoyed this film. I'm a big fan of Lovecraft's work, as well as the adaptations of his various work. This particular story has been made into a film several times, and out of all of those, I kind of feel that this is probably my favorite one out of all those adaptations. And as I've said, there have been good ones, there have been bad ones, of all kinds of different Lovecraft's work, and I definitely think that this one should be held up as one of the better versions of Lovecraft's work, like in terms of adaptations. However, Lovecraft done right, that is an issue for me that we will get to in a minute, but before I start bitching, I want to jump into just a few things that I thought were really good about the movie. They're going to be all the same things everyone else has said, but I feel like if I'm going to bitch, I should at least go through the things that the film does very, very well. And keep in mind, this is a movie that I did enjoy. However, I've always been of the opinion that there's no such thing as a perfect movie. Even my favorite movies that I feel are works of art and masterpieces have things that don't really work for me in them, and I feel that no matter what, it's necessary to address those things if we're going to objectively look at it, a movie, or any piece of art for that matter. So let's go ahead and jump into the things that I did like. So first off, in terms of adaptation, this is a pretty strong entry in terms of all the Lovecraft adaptations that have existed. This one stays much more true to the original story and the spirit of that story than most adaptations that we've seen. Mind you, there are quite a few divergence from that story, but as we'll get into in later parts of the video, that is something that has to be done when adapting Lovecraft. So, to the best of their ability, they stayed true to it, and I really appreciated that. Beyond that, it is a solid horror movie. I just enjoyed the movie itself. Even if this had not been based on an H.P. Lovecraft story, the movie that it is, I would have enjoyed, because the writing in it is relatively solid. There are definitely some issues there, but again, we'll get to that in a minute. But in general, the characters were written in a way that I was able to empathize with their situation. The world was written in a way that, for the most part, I kind of believed all the different elements at play. And in general, it had a nice Lovecraftian climax, which I definitely enjoyed. The cinematography and the directing in general were absolutely beautiful. I really appreciate the way that the scenes are set up and the way the scenes are lit and the way that the effects are integrated into the movie. The effects are also pretty solid. The physical effects that they have in the movie are tip-top. I really enjoy all of those, and a lot of the digital effects they have are very good too. Especially with a lot of the the greenery and the flora and the different plants and all those kind of things. They really, really look good. The color itself looks pretty good. I would say that, really, the hardest thing about them doing the special effects for this movie are the fact that Lovecraftian things are supposed to be something that are so bizarre that our minds can't handle them, and they're having to take those concepts and try to make them into something that our minds can handle and perceive and be affected by. So the color, as well as some of the other smaller animals and insects in the movie, kind of suffer from this, where they're trying to go for a somewhat uncanny valley feel to them to get that Lovecraftian sense, but it also makes us feel like we're not looking at something real, which can be interpreted as bad special effects. So it's a really really gray area that they're playing with in some of these effects, but all in all, I think they did a very good job. The casting for the movie is also excellent. When I went into this, I didn't know if it would be good, but I knew that I would enjoy Nick Cage freakouts. I absolutely do. But there are other parts in the movie where he's playing it more like a regular father, and I actually think he does very well in those scenes too. It was a little bit distracting that he pulled out his Vampire's Kiss voice for his first few freakouts, but I feel as the movie goes on, it becomes something a little bit more unique. So, yeah, again, across the board, I thought that the kids were pretty good for the roles that they were cast in. The mother is very well portrayed. The character of Ward is a little bit weird, but that's not because of the actor. That's more just because of the function that he serves in the script, which again we'll get to here in a minute. The score has a nice creepy vibe that I really, really enjoy, and I think that a lot of the editing works very, very well, especially within the given scenes. We'll get to a thing in a minute in terms of the whole movie, but in general, I found that the editing really, really worked and helped the filmmakers achieve the desired effect of each individual scene. All in all, on pretty much every level that I normally count as like what makes a good movie, this movie holds up pretty solidly. So now let's go ahead and jump into my issue with people calling this a masterpiece and saying that it is Lovecraft done right. Because again, good movie doesn't necessarily mean those two things are true.
It lives in the world. It grew down there, poisoning everything, changing everything into something like the world of people.
Alright guys, so, is this movie a masterpiece? No, it's not. It's a really solid movie, I really enjoy it, but masterpiece is definitely stretching it a little bit too far, and I'll give you just a few examples of the reasons why I say this. Number one, pacing and editing. Now, again, Lovecraft stories have a tendency to be kind of slow-paced and slow-moving, and this movie definitely achieves that. However, one of the things that is the reason for this happening in Lovecraft movies is so that we can slowly feel the insanity of characters creeping in. It's very effective in that way. This movie is not. Now, mind you, in this movie, they shift a lot of the focus from the madness that's going on to a kind of more body horror aspect, which I really enjoy. However, in terms of the madness, which is actually the key feature of the story they're adapting, it really falls short. Specifically, it feels like in the beginning of Act 2, we're missing a good bit, maybe 10 to 15 minutes of Act 2, because there are scenes where characters are a little annoyed by stuff and things are a little bit weird, and then the parents leave and things continue to happen with the kids, but when the parents get back, they're even fucking crazier than they were before, and they've been away from the house. I don't know. All I know is that it seems like there's a big gap in the progression of these characters' mental decline that's missing. It's just not there. So I found it a little bit hard for parts of the movie for me to make that transition and buy into the creeping madness that this family is experiencing. Again, I know the movie shifts in another direction, but it feels like there needs to be a little bit more connective tissue there for that. The next thing I'm going to go on to say is that, man, there are some scientific inaccuracies in this movie that I have a problem with. Now, keep in mind, this is a science fiction movie. I'm willing to give them a lot of leeway, but there are some things in this movie, for example, the character Ward, who, mind you, he's a water expert, but he went to school, he clearly went to a good college, okay? So if I know the difference between a meteor, a meteorite, and a meteoroid, that motherfucker should too. The next thing that I want to mention actually is not necessarily a negative on the film. It's more a misconception by people who have listened to the director talk and watched the film, and then them projecting that kind of esoteric, like, artsy level onto things to kind of pump the movie up in their mind, and that is that people are saying that there's so much purple used in this movie because purple is not a real color. That's an issue on multiple levels. Number one, because the director has never said that. First off, he's not using purple, he's using violet, which is a combination of the red and blue spectrums of, like, wavelengths of light, which come from opposite ends of the spectrum. The idea by using a lot of violet in the movie and kind of purpley tones and pinky tones is the idea that it is taking things that we can perceive from the outside of our perceptions and pushing them together to kind of create a weird, uncanny feel, which is really interesting and really cool. The other problem with that is people saying purple's not a color. Now, I understand the arguments for purple not being a color. The problem is that we're treating color like it is a definitive fact of nature. Color is not a definitive fact of nature. Again, when people say there's no such thing as purple, what they mean is that there is no wavelength of light that we perceive as purple. But the problem with that is that, again, you're not talking about the color purple. You're talking about the wavelength that our brain interprets into the sensory input of the color purple. Okay? That is something that we are experiencing, not something that exists. And the word purple is just something, and again, in different languages it will vary. The title that we put on that perception is just something that we as humans came up with, so when we describe it or say that to another human, they have a comprehension of the sensory input we're talking about, okay? So to say that purple is not a real color is saying that, like, that's the same as saying blue's not a real color, because no, none of the colors are fucking real. It's our perception of it is our perception of sensory input that our brain is taking in and interpreting in a way that we can perceive the world, okay? So, sure, purple's not a real color. Whatever. Fuck it. And furthermore, beyond the things I already mentioned, there are plenty of continuity problems in this movie. Now, some of that, I believe, again, is because that there's probably a section of this movie missing, and some of that other stuff I think isn't actually continuity problems, it's kind of the way that the color is messing with time, but because that's never really depicted or explained in a way that is clear, it's hard to tell which of those things, like, there's some things like, you know, the alpacas being back out, that's not a continuity error, that's clearly time being manipulated, but there are other things where props and set pieces move, people's positions move, and it's not supported by the way it's visually depicted that is an alteration of time, it is more of a mistake. And these things happen in a movie, but again, if we're calling it a masterpiece, whenever, like in the first 20 minutes of the movie, I can spot 5 of these things, it's a problem, okay? But again, I don't want to nitpick, because I like the movie, and if you haven't noticed, that's great. Don't notice it, just enjoy the fucking movie. It's not a masterpiece, though, okay? And the other thing that I would say is that while I appreciate the adaptation of the Lovecraft work, including some of the narration from the story, the narration at the beginning and the end of the movie feel completely out of place with the movie. The character Ward, who delivers it, he doesn't talk like that in any of the rest of the movie. And because we're not given, like, a proper framing of why he would be talking in that way, it's really weird. I really appreciate it as a Lovecraft fan, but it doesn't actually seem to fit into the movie that they've got. So I kind of wish that they actually would have rewritten it to paraphrase more to the character Ward in the other scenes, like natural flow and dialect and stuff. Like, it doesn't fit with that character or in the overall movie. Appreciate its inclusion, but it's out of place. So once again, that's something that's nice, but detracts from it being a masterpiece.
We all know what's coming, but we can't give it away. It's got everything that lives. They all drunk the water. It got strong on them. Fed itself on them. It came from the stars. Where things ain't like they are here. It's just a color. But it burns.
Alright, so now that I'm done with my bitching segment of the video, it's time to move into the snooty pontification segment of the video. So, is this movie Lovecraft done right? No, it is not. Plain and simple, no, it is not. And I will break it down for you just a little bit. But the real thing to keep in mind here is that we will never see a movie that is Lovecraft done right, because the medium is the message. HP Lovecraft, along with guys like Clive Barker, and some even comic book writers like Grant Morrison, and some of the stuff by Brian K. Vaughan, these are things that exist in the medium that they exist in, whether it be books or comic books or something other than TV and movies. because there are things there that you can do that you can never do in TV or a movie. One of the things that makes H.P. Lovecraft's work so indelible and so kind of universal is the fact that he's playing on a lot of things from the individual reader's subconscious. Like, Lovecraft describes plenty of his creatures, but he describes them in ways that your mind can only get vague glimpses and shadows based on things that are relative to our comprehension. But almost all the creatures that Lovecraft deals with are things that are beyond our comprehension. Things that our human minds physically cannot grasp. Like, looking upon them cause madness. And by the very nature of those type of things, you're never going to be able to replicate that in film, because in film you have to take a bunch of people and make a consensus on what this thing looks like and how it moves and how it functions and how that's best going to depict the emotions that you want in the scene. The creature itself no longer serves the same function in a movie that it does in a book, and it doesn't play on the audience's fears in the same way. Instead, you are presenting the fear to them, and there's a little bit they're bringing with it. But whereas in the books, the audience is bringing the majority of the fear out of their own mind, so you're never going to be able to live up to that on film. It's just not going to happen. There are some things that are unfilmable, and I don't hold it against this movie for trying, not at all. But it definitely falls short in that respect. Like, the book focuses much, much more on the madness of the characters, and how it kind of messes with their perception of the world around them, and time, and, like, we really get into the kind of strange, bizarre minutia of madness, you could say. This movie, because that is something that is so internal, and so hard to convey visually without being heavy-handed about it, or manipulative about it, or having to use, like, cliched movie tricks, that this film tries to go another way. And they go about halfway into that, and then focus more on kind of the body horror, which is intrinsic to most Lovecraft movies, because, like, creatures and body horror are an aspect. Like, the horror of the self is a big aspect of Lovecraft's work. And so I understand most movies wanting to use that and translate that into a visual form that can help their storytelling. So I don't hold it against the movie at all, but it is something that will keep the movie from ever truly being Lovecraft done right. Beyond that, like, while again they maintained a lot of the story elements, there's also a lot of horror movie cliches and tropes that don't really exist in the story that they've added in this story. A lot of the stuff with the younger kid, while there, are things with children tied into the story, like, these very much play on haunted house character tropes and generally kid and horror movie tropes. There's also a lot of parts of the family dynamic that are very cliched amongst, like, modern horror films. And I see why you would want to use these tropes and incorporate them into this particular movie, and how you could transcend them and how it could work. And in a lot of senses, the movie does that. Like, these tropes did not necessarily bother me in terms of my enjoyment of the movie. However, they do bother me when the movie is trying to be held up. And I'm sorry, it's not trying to be held up, but other people are holding it up as the perfect crowning achievement of what Lovecraft can be in film. Because this film is not really a Lovecraft film. It's inspired by his work, but the director, this is his film. And it's a damn good film. But it is not Lovecraft done right. There will never be a movie that is Lovecraft done right, plain and simple.
What do you mean, you tried? Do you have any idea how much those animals cost us? They are alpacas. Alpacas.
Right on, children of the screen. Thank you very much for watching my video on Color Out of Space. Again, it's a movie that I definitely enjoyed. I highly recommend it to anyone if you're a horror fan, or a Nick Cage fan, or even an HP Lovecraft fan, or just someone who wants to see some cool, crazy shit. Check this movie out. It's really, really good. But it definitely has some problems, and as we discussed, there is no such thing as a movie that is HP Lovecraft done right. But you know what? That's just my opinion. My very thorough, very, opinion, but it's just my opinion. So let me know what you thought down in the comments below. And if you like this video, please share it with some friends, and definitely leave a like. And if you're not subscribed to the channel, then make sure and hit that little button so you can check out all the dope stuff I'll have coming out in the future. Thank you very much, children of the screen. Hope you all have a good one. Nerd Scum.